The year was 1789 when King Louis XVI fell in high debt crisis. The peasants were disappointed due to the lack of economic status. The men and women were forced to work long hours in fields. Later, when King Louis was executed, the war began when the government had approved to start a war with other countries for food, money, and good economy. Finally, in the year of 1794, Napoleon had brought the French War to a final end. The French Revolution created a historical background of causes and effects of the tax laws that the war imposed throughout the history and how it impacts France today. The French Revolution was taking place in the middle of the Times Square area. During the war, the buildings in the Times Square area were being destroyed. Here's a quick timeline of the French Revolution. In the year of 1756, the start of the 7 wars were compounded into debt situation, and in the year 1774, King Louis XVI's ceremony was held in Reims. Later, in the year 1775, the American War of Independence has extended through the years of 1775 through 1783. In the year of 1778, France had declared a war against Great Britain in support of the American colonies. The subsequent war, the debt situation further. Finally, the year of 1781, the Second Ordinance prevented those centuries of pride from entering the army officer corps. So these were the most important dates and events that had occurred during the time of the French Revolution. Historical background. The debt crisis had made the French part or take place with the American War of Independence, which had eventually led France into an assembly with the Estates General on imposing new tax laws. Later, the confusions over the Constitution of France and the improvements of the community orders had declared as its own national assembly. Later, there was an oath that was being divided by France by the law of government against the church and declaring France a republic. Later in the year 1793 was the year the king was executed. As the French Revolution wars were still going on in the region, people were furious about the attacks that were intending to destroy the churches. They wanted to rebel against this attacks that keep occurring. So they created a national convention created by the Committee of the Public Safety to control France in 1793. In 1795, after the attacks were over, there was a new legislative system which was run by the Directory of 5 men. After the assemblies before were being replaced by the army, and General Napoleon Bonaparte had created a rule in France. Napoleon had wanted to end all the revolutionary wars. Then in the year of 1804, he was crowned the Emperor of France, which was finally declared wars were over. The Emperor began to rule. The Reign of Terror was the main killing that occurred in the French Revolution. Lots of people had died due to the killings and attacks. It occurred during July 27, 1794. The number of killings ranged from 16,000 to 14,000 people. Several leaders had died during the Reign of Terror, such as Saint Just and Robespierre.
The French Revolution was caused by a variety of different social, political, and economic issues. One of the biggest issues in France pre-war was the social structure. The society was divided into 3 different social classes called estates. The first estate was made up of clergymen, the second estate was made up of nobles, and the third estate was made up of everyone else. This third estate included everyone from peasants living on the streets to doctors who made a fine living. At the time before the war, the population of France was about 3 million people, all of which were ruled under King Louis XVI. About 80% of these people were members of the third estate. About 90% of these people were living below the poverty line and were peasants. These peasants were constantly exposed to dirty air, dirty water, and had a very short life expectancy. Because of the economic crisis, taxes were placed on food and many other goods, so these people could not even afford to feed their families. However, the biggest problem in the social structure was that the third estate people were not recognized as an important part of society, even though they made up the greatest population. Only the king and other clergymen made the decisions in government, because at this time France was an absolute monarchy. A combination of these social and political issues angered the peasants, and even when they expressed their discontent to the officials, they were ignored. Social and political problems were not the only major cause of the French Revolution. The people of France were also greatly influenced by the American Revolution. The success of the Americans to overthrow British rule encouraged the French to fight for their freedom. The ideas of free thinkers like Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau became widespread and caused a great uprising in French communities. Another important cause of the revolution was the economic crisis. Before the war, many rulers took the throne and saw no problem spending vast amounts of money on personal pleasure, grand palaces, and other examples of excess. These rulers did not have a group of legislators or advisors that took control. over the country's finances, so the money of France was left to the monarchs. Along with this massive unchecked spending by the monarchs, there was a number of other issues that had a big impact on French economic status. For one thing, the national debt was quite large years before the French Revolution even started, and the 7 Years' War plus the American Revolution pretty much emptied the national budget because of the amount of troops needed.
If there were a victim in the French Revolution, it would be France's peasants, which lived in dreadful conditions. Although the economy in France was not in the best shape at the time, the peasantry faced burdensome taxes that were only inflicted on them, while the aristocrats and the clergy did not have to pay. On top of taxes, peasants did not have the rights that the first and second estate were privileged to enjoy. Would causes such as these spark a revolution? There were 2 tedious jobs that a peasant would be lucky enough to obtain: a farmer or a factory worker. The farmers lived and worked on farmlands under the authority of feudal lords, the owners of the farmlands where the peasants resided. Everywhere the resident sojourner levied dues on fairs and markets, and everywhere enjoyed exclusive rights of hunting. It was the general rule that farmers must bring their wheat to their lord's mill and the grapes to his winepress. A universal and very onerous right was that named laudes adventes, that is to say, an impost levied by the lord on transfers of land within his domain. And throughout the whole of France, the land was subject to quitrents, ground rents, dues in money or in kind payable by the peasant proprietor to his lord and irredeemable by the former. In addition to paying rent and crops to the feudal lords, the French government demanded taxes from the peasantry as well. Gwen Lewis explains in The French Revolution, Rethinking the Debate, the persistence of feudal social structures meant that the real wealth of the country was not taxed. The great landowners, the church, and the nobility escaped most of the taxes which fell upon land. Although there were few peasants who owned their own farmland, they weren't in much better shape than the ones under feudal lords. The French Revolution, the typical rural family of 5, required 60 bushels of wheat per year, or with the triennial rotation of crops, about 15 acres of land for food. However, 70% of peasants who owned land had less than 2.5 acres of land. With another burden to add, France's climate was not the greatest, with droughts and harsh winters, and the poor peasants did not have the advanced techniques and tools to solve problems like the ones they faced. Life in the city for peasants was not much of a high life either. If you were a peasant in an urban setting, you worked tirelessly in a factory or shop just to count on a small ration of overpriced bread. In the summer of 1787, a 4-pound loaf, 2 of which were required daily to feed a family of 4, cost 8 sous. Due in a large part to poor weather and low crop yields, by February 1789, the price had nearly doubled to 15 sous. In Simon Scamma's book, Citizens, a chronicle of the French Revolution, he notes, the average daily wage of a manual laborer was between 20 and 30 sous, of a journeyman mason at most 40. The doubling of bread prices and of firewood spelled destitution. Riots began to arise in April of 1789, but it was often rural peasants versus another. Some demanded the lowering of prices, while others demanded it remain the same, so wages would not be cut because of lower bread prices. There was so much controversy with the way things were going with the peasants and other social estates that war was the only way of reaching reform, peace, and a sense of fairness in the country of France.
The French Revolution was seen as a failure in many people's eyes because it did not have obvious result and sent the country into an even deeper debt than was before the war. However, the revolution unified France and gave it democratic ideas even though it did not become a democracy. The revolution also put an end to feudalism, so social classes did not dominate society any longer. This revolution tore down the ancient structure of Europe and fueled the fires of more wars all over the continent. From where the revolution left off in 1799, France has come a long way. It has come from having unequal estates into forming a republic. It has come from a deep abyss of debt into a thriving economy. It has come from a diverse society of creative minds to a society of unified people. If you were to take the words that describe France today, they could easily shape what many countries in the world today believe in. France's influence from the past has shaped the cultural, economic, and political stances of countries in the world today.